Linus Media Group is one of the most interesting creative brands. They're the brand behind LTT, Linus Tech Tips. If you've been on my channel long enough, you know that I'm a big fan of a lot of things that they're doing, and it's probably like one of 5 or 6 videos that I made about their business. And this one specifically will go over some of the visuals and the metrics that LTT team shared in their latest upload when they talk about their revenue. It's very interesting from the perspective of any creator brand to kind of like peek behind the curtain and see what that pie chart looks like for every creator. But for LMG, it's very specific and interesting because this is a massive company with over like 120 employees, multiple different product lines, physical, digital, a lot of channels behind them. So there's a lot of information that we can gather from it to inform your creator brand. With that said, and without further ado, let's quickly jump in and talk about some numbers. By the way, spoiler alert, there's not going to be any like hard millions of dollars of numbers, nothing actual. A lot of it is relative, meaning percentages, but it again still gives you the idea of what the direction is, but just want to be very upfront about it and makes sense, although there's a way for us to extrapolate. I'll leave it until the end of the video, but there's an interesting stat that we can extrapolate from what we're going to see in this presentation to help us get a rough idea of what the actual size of their revenue is. So before we get there, first and foremost, for 2024, it's impressive to see that for media company like Linus Media Group, Creative Warehouse represents majority, 55% of their current total revenue. If you're not familiar, Creative Warehouse is essentially their retail brand, specific physical goods, right? So they make backpacks, screwdrivers, they make table mats, desk mats for the computers. They make a lot of like different small accessories, t-shirts, hoodies, caps, a lot of different things basically across the board. And it's now 55% of their business, which is kind of crazy and also explains why they've been driving so much investment towards it. In some of the prior videos, I spoke about their kind of like warehouse specifically, and we spoke about some of the products that they're working on. And clearly in 2024, the numbers yielded the result, right? That they were after. Between the rest of it seems to be very evenly split between like in-video ads, YouTube AdSense, and some of the sponsored projects that they've handled with Floatplane, which is their subscription service we're going to talk about in a little bit, and some of the other smaller revenue points. They give a very interesting comparison, right? 2020 to 2024. And this is where you can see where creator warehouses went from like 15% of the business back when they used to sell just t-shirts and kind of like, more of apparel accessories to 55% now that they have a few major product lines that we're going to see in some of the future visuals. So this is kind of like a massive change. And they talk about it, and apologies, it's all of it screen grabs from their video, right? And I'll link the video down below so you can kind of like watch the full thing out of their mouth, so to speak. But I'm just making observations specifically based on my experience working with the creators and kind of like analyzing the creator economy. So for that perspective, you can kind of like see that all of these product lines were not part of that original 15%. So since then, by 2024, they launched the screwdriver line. They obviously launched their kind of like backpacks. And between these two product lines, so precision driver including, it's also on the screwdriver. So they have like these 5 screwdriver types products, and then the backpacks, they grew like a ton. And this is the breakout, the pie chart for their total revenue off of that 55% in 2024. That's specific for the creator warehouse. And you can see that between the backpacks and the screwdrivers, they pretty much make 44% of their revenue from that specific category. And then apparel is there at 19%. And the rest of them is kind of like just like at a small number. Oh, I forgot, I should have included 6% over here because it makes it a nice, cool 50% total, right, between the 3 categories, with the rest kind of like being reasonable, especially water bottles, 3%. Their water bottles actually pretty good quality. So I just in general appreciate their brand. But it's interesting to see how finding the right physical product, and this is where kind of like one of those first lessons I would want to share, the key to success of the creator warehouse was the fact that they realized in their content, they talk all about the computer assembly, tinkering and playing around with different hardware. And the screwdriver market has not been like really reinvented for that long at all, right? It's like for years now, it's been pretty standard. You have your standard, Phillips screwdrivers, flathead screwdrivers, and a couple of other types, and that's about it. What they really created was high value, high quality product, which is very high functional. Like I actually have, I think like 2 or 3 of the screwdrivers because I do use them around the house when I need to do some things. And those products are amazing. I love using them. From the perspective of like compared to some of the other old school screwdrivers that like I would have from my grandfather or from my dad, very different experience, right? So they took it to the next level. They also charge pretty penny. I want to say I paid like $50 or $60 for the screwdriver. So they're not cheap, but in my opinion, they are worth it. And that also explains such a kind of like high percentage share. And from the backpacks, their backpacks apparently also pretty great. From what I saw the reviews, I'm more of a nomadic guy. I use Peter McKinnon nomadic for my backpack, especially for the camera gear. But from their perspective, their backpacks are apparently very comparable in the quality and also the price. They're not inexpensive. We're talking about, I think, 150 plus to like the biggest and the most expensive backpack being like close to $300. So this kind of like their story behind their growth in the retail space. And again, they found the right value, they found the right things that their audience cares about, and they hit nail on the head with these two product lines. And the quality was the big one that they emphasized. When it comes to like the AdSense, and again, just to quickly, although they'll show it on one of the future visuals, used to be about 26% of their business, and now it's about 11%. So technically it's shrinking, but it's shrinking as a percentage. So in the actual numbers it can remain flat or even grow, but as a percentage of the total pie it's starting to shrink. And they kind of like talk a little bit about it here, where when it comes to the actual AdSense revenue, they see the growth in the premium users, right? So from the viewership perspective, it's only 30% about their viewers come from the premium subscription, but close to 40% of the revenue on the AdSense that they make is coming from the premium. So it's clearly working. And it's also kind of like working in the hands of YouTube, because YouTube has been emphasizing premium subscriptions a lot. I've been on premium subscription for years now, and it's still kind of like staggering experience sometimes to log in and see an amount of ads yeah. People have to endure sometimes before they see the content. I got spoiled with the fact that I've been on a premium subscription for a little while, and it's been amazing and much better experience watching YouTube. So clearly it's working and it helps the business from that perspective. So, and it's also the important learning here is that premium users are not really hurting the brands, the creator brands, because they give higher revenue per user based on this stat, but also from perspective of experience, they have much better experience watching your content. So if you are growing your premium user base, it's a good thing for your brand. And they talk a little bit about, again, mid-roll, pre-roll ads. I don't think there's necessarily too much to take away from here. For me, the biggest one was to see the premium experience, and the rest of it is like, for a lot of you, especially if you're a younger creator who just started, this is your 100% of the pie, right? Like mid-roll, pre-rolls, right? So from that perspective, I don't necessarily think there's like too many groundbreaking learnings, but the premium was the one that I would love you to take away from this conversation. Now, they kind of like talk about the shrinking part, and this is the important part to keep in mind, is that when you see the percentages shrink on some of these pie charts, it doesn't mean a bad thing. Number one, I think it's a good thing because they're moving away from the dependency on the AdSense, which is good as a business, and they now have a lot more revenue in their own hands versus, relying on YouTube and risking potential future apocalypse. So the business is more stable. But also from the perspective of, as you look at it as a metric, the fact that it's shrinking just means that the other pies are growing so much bigger, the other parts of the pie grow so much bigger that it just crowds out. And in reality, they can actually be making more on AdSense in 2024 versus 2020. But from the perspective of the percentage, as a percentage of the total, it just decreased. So if you see those negatives, don't always think of them as a negative. It actually, in my opinion, in this case, it is a positive. And they talk a little bit comparison, kind of like telling you the story that between 2016 and 2020, they grew this part, right? Again, warehouse did not exist and it showed up. Sponsored projects and sponsored content was a lot bigger. Affiliate links was huge, right? 16% of their business, and now it's only 2. Only 2 in this revenue. And I think it was even sub 2%, right? Let's see affiliate come back for a second. Okay, it's a little bit 3%. So it increased a little bit, but still nothing compared to what it used to yield them as a brand back in the day. And this is not unusual, right? I've seen this kind of like evolution happening a lot across the creator economy. And I think for any brand that continues to kind of like decrease their real reliance on the revenue sources that are not in your direct control is a good thing. So I also take it as a positive from that perspective. As I start kind of like digging further into the AdSense and talking a little bit about the yields, the big thing here to keep in mind is on YouTube specifically, right? And I mostly spend my time on YouTube. Obviously, there's all other platforms, but I think Linus Tech Tips gives us a very interesting view into comparison of all 3 major formats of content within YouTube space. And as you can see, their short content provides the most amount of impressions. 13 million is amazing. It's for their best video, but still, 13 million is a great number, but when we start trickling into the revenue, it only made about $1,300, right? So from the impact perspective, it wasn't commercially as big of an impact, but it was an impact from the perspective of impressions, which can still be interesting for you if you're trying to create relationships with a brand, with a sponsor brand who are just seeking the impressions. For them, this is a great metric, and shorts are great because of that. But then when you look at the VODs, so it's your regular long form videos on YouTube, you can see that the performance wasn't as high. It's still impressive for the largest video in 2024, but now you see the revenue starting to increase. So you actually, although you make a lot less impressions, your revenue for the brand is a lot bigger, right, from that video. So this is kind of like that dynamic that I see across the board, right, for all the creators, where although you get a lot less views and impressions on your long form content, you usually make a lot more money. In this case, tenfold, right, of money between that and the short form content. The most interesting part was the live streams. And so again, live streams can fluctuate, and Most Critical Charlie, he shared a lot about his metrics and how one of his live streams made like 80 grand for him. From that perspective, you can also see that actually on YouTube it seems to be doing pretty well, and I'm sure that's probably a mixed bag. I don't recall if they cross live streamed it across like Twitch and YouTube, but it's still quite impressive with the fact that although the total live stream did not necessarily generate as many impressions, close even to what the views on the shorts did, on the long form did, but revenue numbers are staggering from that perspective. So it was very interesting to see kind of like how these three key categories performed for Linus Tech Tips across three of their best videos, right? On each video, again, your mileage will vary. On each type of content and the niche that you're in, your mileage will vary, but it's an interesting dynamic, and it's a dynamic that's representative of a lot of things that I've seen outside of this brand. But it's finally, I'm glad to see that there is a brand that clearly shared their metrics behind it. Now, as a good reminder, Linus Tech Tips is only one of many channels within Linus Media Group, but it's an interesting stat to see how like expanding into other channels did not necessarily incrementally yield them as much revenue. And like Short Circuit, Tech Link, LMG Clips, like those are Tech Wiki, they're amazing channels. Like I've I think I'm subscribed pretty much to all of them, with except of maybe some of the smaller ones or more niche ones like Mac Address, or they're just movies because they're just not the content I'm pursuing. But I think the big takeaway for me from this visual is that still the majority of the revenue yields from a single primary channel, and majority of their brand awareness is based on Linus Tech Tip. Even I refrain from using their official name as LMG, which is Linus Media Group, because that's their official brand name for the parent brand. Most of the people know them as Linus Tech Tip, and they assume Linus Tech Tip incorporates this, but Linus Tech Tip is only one channel out of many within their group. So that's kind of like the difference. But again, the brand awareness is there, the revenue is there, and I think the big takeaway is that incremental, unless you're really discovering a new niche and a new type of format for yourself as a brand, it makes a lot more sense to just focus on a single channel and kind of like grow from there. So again, as with many things, it will depend on your niche, but something I wanted to call out. This is a cool thing, and Mr. Colton ended up being kind of like featured in this video because he's actually head of their brand business development. So he's the person who is responsible for the relationship with the brands that place the sponsorship ads. And really what he talks about is a diversity of different kind of businesses that advertise with them, right? From your PC pods to your software as a service to all the different physical products like furniture is interesting and consumable as well. The cool visual here is really this one, because it kind of like tells you the percentage share of their sponsored revenue, right? And as you can see, actually, they have very specific categories like PC parts or SaaS being predominant, right? They're driving almost 60%, no, yeah, 60 plus percent of their total business, with really like lifestyle accessories, consumer electronics coming right after it, which is again very interesting to see from the perspective of who's spending how much with them, from the perspective of the percentage. And also they've mentioned, I think their top three recurring sponsors generated 15% of the revenue for the company, which is kind of like quite impressive. But again, coming back to that visual of when you look at the total right pie chart, it's still nice to see that it's relatively small compared to everything else that they're doing. So even though they might represent a big chunk, like 15% of the business for the sponsored content, it's not necessarily as impactful if, say, one of them goes down or decides not to renew their partnership with the LMG. They can continue to operate and they're going to be fine as a business. And finally, the last thing we're going to kind of like call out is the float plane. Float plane currently stands at what it looks like to be creeping up to like 45,000. I think it's like 43,000 subscribers now. The Floatplane is their subscription service. It's essentially a platform where they post a lot of the extras, a lot of the videos that they sometimes preview on the platform before it goes anywhere. It's their membership channel. Long story short, it's their membership channel. They still put a lot of videos on their membership behind the paywall on YouTube, but really their big place and the big place where they like fund a lot of folks and they have other creators uploading the videos. It's kind of like their version of Nebula basically, or their version of Side Plus for Sidemen if you're familiar, or Mythical Society for Mythical, Good Mythical Morning, right? So they trying to drive a lot of traffic towards this. They promote it a lot. They make about $5 to $10 per person who subscribes to this service. And this is where it's interesting. And it's back of the envelope, so I don't have the visual, but kind of like did a quick back of the envelope math, because what they're basically saying, if say you assume everyone's paying $5, which they're not, they're probably paying a little bit more. But even if $5 per user paid per month for 40,000 users, again, they have more, they have close to like 43, 44,000, but let's assume a smaller metric. They are basically making what it looks like to be, I don't have my calculator, but basically, okay, we'll do quick math off the top. So it's going to be $60 per year times 40K. So we're talking about $240,000, right? $2.4 million. Sorry, there you go. $2.4 million annually that they make off of Floatplane. The cool thing about Floatplane, let me find it visual because it will tell you a little bit about the size of their business. Let me just share. And Floatplane is 7% of their total pie chart. So we now can guesstimate that based on the smaller assumptions. So I'm taking an assumption of $5, which is likely less than their average per user, and 40,000, which is smaller than their actual number of subscribers. This part of the pie represents about $2.4 million. So if you know that $2.4 million represents 7%, you can extrapolate and calculate the entire size of the pie, which is about $33 million conservatively in terms of the revenue that they made last year, LMG Group. So now it puts some perspective into the numbers. If the entire pie is $33 million, you can now say, okay, 55% of it is Creator Warehouse, which means Warehouse drove something like $16 million of revenue for them, right? And you can also extrapolate from that and say they made close to $3 million in a year from like in-video sponsored ads, or the AdSense was about $3 to $4 million in annual revenue for just 2024. So quite impressive numbers. Again, this is purely guesstimate, estimate, right? We don't know what the rounding is happening. We don't know exactly the revenue they're making off of Floatplane, but it gives you the idea that Linus Media Group is in pretty decent position. Again, you can say like, oh my God, this is amazing, $33 million for the creator brand. But don't forget, again, they have like 120 employees. 120 employees probably drive, I wouldn't be surprised if close to like $8 million. Again, depends on the salaries. They're, I think, in Vancouver, right? So they're in Canada. I don't know the cost of employees there and what kind of like additional fringe expenses you have as a business, but you're probably looking anywhere between like $8 to $10 million worth of business expenses on salaries alone to cover that many employees, right? And then you have all the other expenses with actual production, with the sets. They bought a bunch of buildings, the lease, the ownership of all those buildings. So I think they're profitable based on these numbers, and they're growing in a good direction. But again, it gives you the idea that although you can look at this and you can say like, oh, they made $33 million off of all of this, and it's amazing that their Creator Warehouse generated like $15 million, say, you also need to remember that they're building physical products. So that $15 million is very expensive for them. Very likely they probably made only and hopefully a couple of $1 million off of that. Then they paid another $10 million for salaries, which leaves them with about like $10 million of potential profit. And even that then got split between like paying for electricity, paying for all the things, paying taxes, all that stuff. So my rough estimate would be at their growth rate, after all the salaries and everything else is done, they hopefully make $1 million or $2 million in profit at most. Right? Again, could be wrong, could be overestimating all the expenses, but that's kind of like my view into this. And some of the key takeaways I think from this entire conversation are, notice how big of an impact it made on them when they figured out the retail type of business and physical products that were really good fit for their audience. It wasn't just t-shirt and caps. When they used to be just t-shirt and caps, it was 10% of the business. The moment they hit the nail on the head with the value, and something I spoke about multiple times in the past, it became 50% of their business immediately, right? Like it exploded their business. Lack of over-reliance on sponsors or AdSense is amazing. Congrats to them on achieving that. They have their destiny in their own hands and they kind of like control it. and the impact that the float plane has and the fact that it continues to grow. And it's not a small chunk of their business, being close to like, $3 million in revenue. It's amazing to have from your own subscription service. And again, creating the stability in your business. That's how you can afford people. That's how you can afford the peace of mind in hiring a CEO to manage the company, peace of mind on maintaining all those employees, and giving a peace of mind to those employees whose like livelihood, mortgages, schools for their kids are all reliant on their salary coming from LMG. All of this is now, you know, supported by very stable revenues from the creator warehouse, from their float plane, and from smaller portions of the pie of other sources that even if some of them go down, overall as a company, they're going to be doing well. So congrats to LMG. Thank you for being so transparent. I love this level of transparency, even though we had to do some back calculation to get to the final numbers. But this is amazing. Again, I continue to be a fan of the brand, continue to be the fan of what they're building, and kind of like that North Star that they give us as a creator brand of how you can take it from a regular YouTube channel to this massive company making north of $30 million, allegedly, in revenue. So congrats to them. Hopefully you found it useful. If you want to kind of like dive in and talk about some of these metrics, so you want to think about the strategy, kind of like commercial strategy for your brand and what your pie would look like, I talk about those things all the time on my channel, but I also love to talk about the creators about this kind of stuff. So feel free to reach out. Otherwise, I'll see you next Saturday. Peace.